I met Annie when I was just 16, and we've been through so much since then. We got married at 21, had our daughter a year later when we were 22, and life seemed to be on track. Now, we're both 47, and I thought I knew everything about her, until that day. It started as a weird day, right from the moment I woke up. I felt sick, like something wasn't right. At first, I thought about calling in sick, but I decided to tough it out and head to work. Little did I know that leaving early that day would be the decision that changed everything. Maybe it was food poisoning from the night before, or maybe just the universe trying to warn me, but I was grateful for that uneasy feeling later. Annie, my wife, was supposed to be at work too. She had gotten ready that morning, just like usual. She was a great cook, and I remember thinking about last night's dinner, probably the one thing she consistently did right, now that I look back. Yet, there were red flags I ignored, especially when it came to her best friend, Kay. Kay was always out with different guys, living this wild, carefree lifestyle that Annie claimed she could never imagine. She'd say how grateful she was to have a husband, a family, stability, yet Kay was her best friend, the same friend who had once slept with Annie's college boyfriend. You are who you hang around, and I didn't see it then. That morning, I fought through my nausea and managed to get through a few hours at work. But by lunch, the feeling had worsened, so I clocked out early. I stopped to grab some medicine on the way home, hoping to knock myself out and sleep it off. Annie was supposed to be at work, so I figured I'd have the house to myself. But when I pulled into the complex, I noticed something odd. Her car was in the parking lot, along with another car I didn't recognize, parked where our neighbor's car should have been. My gut twisted. Why was Annie's car here? I parked out on the street, thinking maybe our neighbor had company and Annie had come home for lunch. As I walked toward our townhome, I heard loud music blasting, so loud that at first, I assumed it was coming from the neighbors. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't, it was coming from inside our place. My heart started pounding. I walked up to the front door and could feel the vibrations of the music. Our bedroom window faced the front, and I could tell the music was coming from there. Something wasn't right. I opened the door and stepped inside, my stomach churning from more than just sickness. The music was blaring, shaking the walls. I took the stairs two at a time and burst into our bedroom, and that's when my world exploded. There she was, Annie, straddling another man. Her best friend, Kay, was there too, kissing the same guy. My brain couldn't even process it. The man turned out to be Annie's boss, but at that moment, I didn't care who he was. I was yelling, shouting over the music, barely able to hear my own voice. Annie jumped off him, panic in her eyes, pleading with me, "Calm down, honey, please. Stop." But there was no calming down. I shoved her aside and went after him, fists flying. I couldn't stop myself. I beat the living hell out of that guy, everything a blur of rage. I remember Kay jumping in, trying to defend him, and landing a hard punch square on my nose. It wasn't broken, but I had to see a doctor later to get it corrected. The whole scene was chaos, Annie begging me to stop, Kay screaming, me throwing punches at her boss. It was surreal, like I had stepped into some twisted reality. Annie and Kay even started fighting each other, clawing and yelling at each other as if they'd suddenly turned on one another. The madness was unreal. I finally reached over, yanked the plug on the stereo, and told that guy to get the hell out of my house. Annie was still crying, trying to explain, but I wasn't hearing any of it. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. Trying to sue her boss and Kay later for what happened? That's a whole different mess. Turns out, real life doesn't play out like it does on the internet. Even now, when I think back to that day, I can't believe it happened. It felt like a bad dream, but it was all too real. He grabbed his stuff and bolted so fast that he ran out of the house practically naked. I rushed to the other room and looked out the window just in time to see him sprinting toward his car, but now he had his pants on. He must have thrown them on in a panic as he ran downstairs. I turned back and headed into the room where my wife was in a heated argument with her best friend. Her friend, exasperated, was saying, "You need to tell him before I do." I stood there, arms crossed, and said, "You might as well tell me, because this marriage is over. Go ahead, spill it." My wife didn't say a word, she just stared at her friend. After a long, tense silence, her friend finally spoke up, saying, "This is what we've been doing. She joined me in the business 3 years ago, right after you lost your job." I could barely process what I was hearing. 3 years? I asked, what kind of business? But deep down, I already knew. The look on her face said it all. She hesitated for a second, then said, "You know what I do?" I shook my head, confused, and said, "No, I really don't. I've seen you with different men over the years, but I never thought much about it. What do you do?" She sighed and looked away before finally admitting, "Men pay me for my services. Mostly just dates, sometimes conversations." My stomach turned. "So, you're an escort," I said, my voice cold and flat. She didn't deny it. I turned to my wife, who had her head hung low, avoiding my eyes. She didn't say a word. I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and left the house. I drove to a nearby family member's place, shaking with anger and disbelief. I told them everything, about the affair, about needing to get tested for STDs, and about the possibility that my daughter might not even be mine. With their help, I found a divorce attorney right away. I didn't have much money at the time, but a close family member lent me what I needed for the attorney fees, even though they insisted I didn't need to pay them back. I made sure to repay them later, though. After getting tested, I was relieved to find out I was clean, and most importantly, my beautiful daughter was indeed mine. The attorney mentioned something I had never heard of before, suing for alienation of affection. Apparently, I could try to hold someone accountable for ruining my marriage. It sounded good at the time, and I was angry enough to go through with it. But it didn't go anywhere. Her boss, the man she was working for, fought the lawsuit and claimed he had nothing to do with our divorce. To make matters worse, my wife took his side, saying our marriage had been falling apart long before she ever got involved with him. In the end, the lawsuit was dropped, and I wasn't able to sue him. But by that point, I didn't care. All I wanted was to finalize the divorce and move on with my life. Money was tight, and I needed to focus on getting out of that toxic marriage. My ex-wife and her boss were eventually fired from their jobs, probably some scandal that caught up to them. I had a strong suspicion that my ex-wife kept working as an escort for a while after the divorce. But now, after all those years, who would even want her? Life had moved on, and so had I. And yet, it was clear she hadn't. The first time I realized she regretted everything was at our daughter's wedding. It wasn't the first time she told me she missed me, but she seemed more desperate this time. We were all sitting around, planning some wedding details, when out of nowhere, she started reminiscing about our honeymoon. "Oh my gosh," she said, smiling sadly, "remember our honeymoon? We stayed at that little hotel, went to that concert, it was such a good time." I avoided eye contact, pretending not to hear her, but she kept going. "We used to be so happy," she said, her voice cracking. "Happy, but stupid old me just had to ruin it." I kept my focus on anything but her. I wasn't interested in revisiting the past, but it was clear she couldn't let it go. She started crying, right there in front of our daughter. My daughter, confused, looked at her and asked, "Mom, what's wrong?" My ex-wife wiped away her tears, barely holding herself together, and said, "I ruined my own life. And now, I have nothing left." She tried to keep talking, tried to get someone to listen, but at that point, no one could. Not me, and not even our daughter. I felt for her, on some level. But it was too late. She had destroyed everything we had, and now she was left trying to pick up the pieces. But that was no longer my problem. My life had moved forward, and she was a distant memory of a time I'd rather forget. As I stood there, my ex-wife leaned in close, looking into my daughter's eyes with an intensity that made my stomach turn. "Promise me you'll do whatever it takes to keep this family together," she urged, her voice trembling. "Don't end up like me." I fought to suppress a laugh, incredulous at her audacity, but a chuckle slipped out before I could stop it. Both my daughter and my ex turned to me with surprised expressions, and I quickly excused myself, heading to the restroom. Once inside, I leaned against the sink, letting laughter bubble up uncontrollably. I gazed at my reflection, shaking my head in disbelief. How had we ended up here? My ex, the woman I once loved, was now pleading with our daughter in a way that felt both comical and tragic. I took a moment to compose myself before heading back out to the front room, where my daughter was busy with wedding preparations. We resumed planning for the big day, but the atmosphere shifted when my ex said she missed me. "Being here, at our daughter's wedding, brings back so many memories," she said softly. "It reminds me of the love we had, the family we built together. I just wish I hadn't destroyed it all." The sincerity in her eyes caught me off guard, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia. She continued, "I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." As she leaned in, tears welling in her eyes, I instinctively pushed her away, trying to keep the mood light. "Hey, you're going to spoil my suit, woman," I said with a teasing smile, but inside, I felt a swell of resentment. I was determined to focus on my daughter's day, to put aside all the baggage that came with my ex. My daughter wanted pictures with both of us, and while I gritted my teeth at the thought, I agreed. It was for her sake, after all. Yet, every time I turned around, my ex was right there, hovering like a shadow. I attempted to engage with other guests, moving around the room, but no matter how hard I tried, she always seemed to find me. "Do you mind?" I asked, irritation creeping into my tone as she appeared right behind me yet again. "Please, hear me out," she insisted, grabbing my shoulder. Her eyes were desperate, and I could see our daughter's cousins watching us, their expressions a mix of confusion and embarrassment. I could only imagine how mortified they must have felt witnessing this awkward exchange. We stepped outside for a moment of privacy, and I felt my temper flare. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice rising. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she revealed that she would soon undergo surgery, something involving her reproductive health, and while she assured me she would be okay, she confessed to feeling utterly alone. Then came the unexpected request, would I be willing to care for her after the surgery since our daughter would be traveling abroad that month? I felt a flicker of sympathy but quickly quashed it. "I'm really sorry you're going through this," I said, trying to sound genuine, "but I can't be there for you." She started crying, reaching out for me again, but I gently pulled away. "Wait," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You won't be there for someone you once loved, the mother of your daughter?" "No," I replied firmly, maintaining my distance. I changed the subject, asking about her best friend, Kate. That's when the conversation took a dark turn. She explained that Kate had ended up in a psychiatric hospital, battling drug addiction and mental health issues. "It's really bad," she said, her voice trembling. "She even tried to hurt a family member who tried to help her." My stomach churned at the news. "Wow," I muttered, shaking my head as I turned to walk back inside. I noticed my ex leaving shortly after, and I caught her talking to our daughter. I saw her wiping away tears, and a knot formed in my chest. I knew this wouldn't be the last I heard from her. A few days later, my daughter called, her voice shaky and filled with anger. "You're such a horrible person," she shouted. "How could you abandon Mom during her surgery? She needs you." I tried to explain my side, but my daughter was inconsolable, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You don't understand. I might have to cancel my trip and lose all the money I've already spent. This isn't fair." I'm not taking care of that woman ever again, I said firmly, frustration boiling over. She needs to hire a professional nurse or something. She's not my responsibility. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could sense my daughter's disappointment, her heart torn between her loyalty to me and her mother. You don't care about her at all, do you? She finally whispered, and I could feel the weight of her words. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. It's not that I don't care, I said, my voice softening. It's just complicated. We had our chance, and it didn't work out. I can't just pretend everything's fine now. Maybe you should try, she snapped back. She's still my mom, and she's hurting. You used to love her. The argument lingered in the air long after we hung up, and I sat in silence, grappling with the emotional fallout. It was a painful reminder of how complicated love and family could be, and I knew this wasn't over. I just hoped my daughter would eventually understand my decision, but for now, I felt the rift between us growing wider, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. I can't say I'm surprised at all by the recent news about my ex-wife's best friend, Kay. In fact, I've been suspicious of her for years. I remember telling my ex-wife once that I thought Kay was on something, there was just something off about her. She always had this hyper attitude, and sometimes she seemed jittery, like she was running on fumes. Whenever I brought it up, my ex would brush it off, claiming that's just how Kay had always been, that she was just a naturally high-energy person. But I had my doubts. Deep down, I suspected Kay had been involved with drugs for a long time, and now it seemed like she finally crossed a line, taking something laced with who knows what. Then one day, I got a call from my daughter, and her voice was trembling with emotion. "Dad, you're being way too harsh on Mom," she said through tears. "You have to understand what she's been through. I know she messed up, but you should be there for her. It's only right." I took a deep breath, feeling my heart sink. This wasn't just about me anymore, my daughter was caught in the crossfire, and I hated to see her so upset. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "That's not going to happen. I'm not going to take care of your mother. She has family, someone else needs to step up and help her. It's not my responsibility." I could sense my daughter's frustration and confusion. She didn't want to hear that, and I couldn't blame her. She was trying to reconcile her love for her mother with the reality of what had happened between us. I wished she could see that I was doing this to protect myself, to keep the toxic energy away from my life. My daughter didn't cancel her trip, though. She went away as planned, and I hoped that maybe some time apart would help her gain perspective. But my ex wasn't done trying to manipulate the situation. Not long after my daughter left, I got a call from my ex-wife's sister. When I answered, I recognized her voice immediately. "I'm calling because my sister wants to talk to you," she said, her tone a mix of urgency and desperation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "No, I know what this is about, and I don't want to hear it," I replied, my frustration bubbling to the surface. But her sister pressed on, telling me that no one else could help Kay and that she needed surgery right away. To my shock, she even offered to pay me to step in. I was stunned. "There's not enough money in this world to make me help," I said. "Please just tell her to stop calling me." Then, my ex-wife herself jumped on the line, her voice shaky with emotion. "Can you please stop being such a jerk and do what you're supposed to do?" she asked, incredulous. I pulled the phone away from my face, staring at it as if it had betrayed me. "What I'm supposed to do?" I echoed, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "Yes, we're divorced, but we were married once. How can you still have all this love for our daughter but none for me? It doesn't make sense," she exclaimed, her voice cracking. I felt a surge of frustration rise in me. "Good luck with your surgery," I said coldly. Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her sister's number. That was just the beginning. I went through my contacts and blocked every single family member of hers I had. I didn't want to receive any more calls or texts begging me to step in and take care of her. She was no longer my responsibility. If she hadn't betrayed me, if she had been the partner I thought I married, then I would have done anything for her. I would have climbed mountains barefoot if it meant saving her. But after everything she put me through, screwing me over, putting my health at risk, and ruining our family, there was simply no way I could go back to that. I was done. As the days passed, I couldn't help but think about how different things could have been. I wanted my daughter to understand that I would always love her and support her, but that didn't mean I had to accept the chaos her mother was trying to drag me back into. My daughter was at an age where she needed to see things for what they were, and I hoped my firm stance would help her gain clarity. But, as a parent, it pained me to see her caught in this turmoil. She was torn between her loyalty to her mother and her understanding of the reality of our situation. I wished I could spare her the hurt, but I knew that sometimes the truth is what sets you free, even if it's painful. I hoped she'd eventually come to terms with it, but for now, I had to focus on my own life, my own happiness, and let go of the toxic ties that had held me back for so long. With each passing day, I found solace in my newfound freedom. I began to explore my interests again, picking up hobbies I had set aside, spending time with friends, and rediscovering who I was outside of my old life. I started jogging in the mornings, the fresh air and the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement clearing my mind. I even joined a local book club, something I never thought I'd enjoy, but it turned out to be a great way to meet new people and engage in deep conversations. Yet, every so often, I'd catch myself reflecting on the choices that brought me here, grappling with the emotions that still lingered beneath the surface. The anger, the betrayal, the longing for what once was, they all bubbled up when I least expected it. I had to remind myself that I was better off without the chaos that my ex had introduced into my life. I was finally able to breathe freely, to think clearly, and to live without the constant weight of her drama dragging me down. I knew I had to be strong for my daughter and show her that while I would always love her, I wouldn't compromise my well-being for anyone else. This was my chance to create a new life for myself, one that was filled with joy, purpose, and, most importantly, peace. And I was determined to embrace it fully. I'm supposed to help you, it's part of my duty as an ex-husband. But let's take a moment to unpack that, because it raises some serious questions. If there are any ex-husbands out there going out of their way to assist their ex-wives after being wronged, I'd say there's something deeply troubling going on. Honestly, you might need to check into a psychiatric hospital right alongside her best friend Kate. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's been a while since I last heard from my ex-wife, and I have no idea how her surgery went. To be completely transparent, I'm not exactly losing sleep over it. Sure, I hope everything went smoothly for her, I wouldn't wish anything bad on anyone. After all, no matter what happened between us, I still remember the good times we shared, the laughter, and the dreams we once had together. But at the end of the day, I'm not the one who's going to drop everything to take care of her like I did when we were married. Those days are over. When we were together, I gave everything I had to make our relationship work, but it felt like she was always just one step away from turning her back on me. I can't be that guy anymore, the one who picks up the pieces when she's in trouble just so she can turn around and spit in my face later. I've been down that road, and it's not a path I'm willing to walk again. Life has changed since our split. I've rediscovered parts of myself that I thought were lost forever. I've started pursuing my passions and interests, things that I put on the back burner while trying to hold our family together. I've begun to find joy in small things again, whether it's picking up a new hobby or spending time with friends who support me. Every day is a step toward building a new life, one that doesn't involve being a safety net for someone who doesn't appreciate it. So, while I sincerely hope she's doing well after her surgery, I refuse to play the role of caretaker again. I'm focused on my own healing and happiness now. The truth is, I'm learning to put myself first for the first time in a long while. I'm not looking back anymore, I'm setting my sights on the future and all the possibilities it holds. It's time for me to reclaim my life and leave the past where it belongs.